Welcome back, and in this video we're talking about ratios of perception. As a quick recap, we've talked about how the brain speaks in the language of pictures. We've talked about how the language you use is the way that you communicate your experience to yourself and the world around you. And we've identified certain patterns of language and behavior that either cause you to get stuck or cause you to move forwards. And all of these lead into the ratios of perception. So we also covered black and white thinking, which is essentially where you have no options, you have no flexibility, you have no choice. Ratios of perception is actually the step above that and how you use that available spectrum of choice that you have to you. Now, I would strongly argue that the way that you perceive an event is equally as important, if not more important, than the event itself. So it's not what happens to you, it's the way you view what happens to you. And ratios of perception is what we use to determine how we're framing, so how we're setting the scene for the things that happen in our life. What we're going to do is just cover a graphic to show you how it works, and I'll talk you through that now. Now, at the most basic level, we've got the got to. When you're talking in terms of got to, it means you've got no flexibility, you've got no choices, you've got no alternatives, and your system is feeling trapped, it's feeling blocked, and you don't have any other way around the challenge that you're facing. So whenever you approach something from the got to perspective, this is going to increase anxiety, it's going to increase stress, and it's going to make the whole experience a lot more challenging. Then we move up a level and we move towards the stage of ought to. Now, whenever we use the language of ought to, it means the thing that we're thinking about isn't intrinsically yours. So it means you've allowed some kind of authority figure or some kind of senior figure in your life to inject their values into you, and you're trying to live by what they have said for you to do. So it's not a internal inspired decision, it's a feeling of obligation based on someone else's values. So that's a position of ought to. And then we start to move towards need to. So this is like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, doing something to get your basic needs met. So it's still coming from a position of imperative language, it still lacks flexibility, it still lacks variation and different options, but it's a little bit more flexible than the ought to and the got to stages. The want to stage is where we really start to see a marked shift. So this is more of a conscious choice. When you want to do something and it's aligned with your values, your desires, your beliefs, then we start to get into this area where you're consciously wanting, you're consciously desiring, and this is coming from a more intrinsic place. And that also means the mental imagery that you create when you're in this want to and desire to stage is going to be much brighter, much more colourful, much more energetic, and that's going to transfer to how you feel about yourself and how you feel about whatever activity you're doing. Then we move towards choose to. So this is where you have a balanced perception of what's going on, you're aware of the advantages, you're aware of the disadvantages, and you're congruent in wanting to move forward. So it's a very much a conscious choice. And then finally we have love to. Love to is where it opens your heart, it's inspiring, it's genuine, it's authentic. And when you're in the love to, anxiety just cannot live. It cannot take place. So this is a really helpful tool to identify how are you speaking about the things in your life, how are you speaking about the people in your life, and how are you speaking to yourself. If you're using this type of language, then that's giving you feedback that you may want to make some changes to make your life more in alignment with what's meaningful to you. If you're using more of this language and there's still moments of anxiety there, then that suggests that there's previous past experiences that are really blocking the way, as opposed to you doing things that are not in alignment with who you are and what you believe. So I'd like you to just pay attention to your dialogue, both internally when you're speaking to yourself and actually when you're speaking to others. And in particular, for those things that generate anxiety, for those challenges, the things that come up that trigger feelings of anxiety, and just pay attention to where on the spectrum are you actually sitting when it comes to the ratio of perception you have about that particular activity. What we can see is the ratios of perception will colour how you view the events that are happening in your life and the options and choices that you have available to you. Now, changing the language will on itself make a little bit of a difference. But if there's something that you strongly resent, simply changing your wording to, oh, I would love to do that, is not really going to feel congruent, it's not going to feel genuine, and actually your system is probably just going to reject that idea. So the challenge then becomes, how do we change our perception of that event? And the way that we do that is by finding both sides. So if it's something that you're not looking forwards to, we want to find out what are the benefits of it, what are the growth opportunities, how is it going to be an advantage to you, so that you can see that it has both sides. When you can neutralize any event like that, so you're not in a place of, oh, I've got to do this, and here's all the negatives, but you're in a place of, here's my pros, here's my cons, okay, actually, on balance, I'll choose to do this. And then you can start to work your way up the spectrum, and the more things that you can do that you love to do, the more inspired you'll be, and the more anxiety will simply just melt away.